Hello, everyone. Hello again to those of you who are with us this morning. Welcome to our third main stage session of this first day of Getting Real 2020. I am Maggie Bowman, a filmmaker, sorry, I've got a little extra window open here. I am Maggie Bowman, a filmmaker, organizer, and the director of programming for this year's Getting Real conference. I join you from the ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people, also known as the Council of Three Fires, here in Chicago, Illinois. My pronouns are she and her, and for those of you who are blind or low vision, I'll briefly describe myself visually. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length dark brown hair. I'm wearing dangly earrings with pink fringe, which are making me very happy today. And I'm joining you from my living room, which has olive green walls and a mirror on one wall. My heart and mind are already quite full from all that you've brought to this space today, in your comments, your questions, your virtual hugs offered over chat, and in the work you've all been engaged in out in the world that you're bringing with you into this space. This session, 3 working groups behind the scenes of field accountability and possibility, embodies all of that. Self-organized groups of makers, curators, distributors, academics, and impact producers who are posing problem questions for our industry and then getting to work on solutions. Prior to becoming a filmmaker, I was a union organizer, and it's been incredibly gratifying to me in recent years to engage in organizing efforts to improve the conditions in our field for makers, communities, and audiences. A lot of my work has been with the Documentary Producers Alliance, where we've worked on developing crediting guidelines and more recently, best practices for investment waterfall. When I joined IDA, I became even more aware of all of the groups out there who were rolling up their sleeves. We decided to pilot a working group program for Getting Real, to hear about the work of a few of those groups at this conference, and also to highlight this model, a model of what I'm calling taking care of business, so that it can proliferate and be supported both institutionally and financially. We have offered modest stipends to these groups, not all of which have accepted them, and a platform to share their work in the hope that all of you can see just how much amazing ground-shifting work people in our field are doing in their off hours. I hope that we can raise more funds in the future to support these groups and additional groups in an ongoing way. The list of existing working groups in our field is long, and we would like to hear from you if you are a part of one. Let us know what you are up to. A couple that I know are underway are one about awards accountability and new models of labor organizing in the nonfiction space. Earlier in the pandemic, we at IDA were engaged in some public policy advocacy to help support filmmakers who were applying for the Paycheck Protection Program and other kinds of federal relief. And we had a conversation with Robert Rabin of the Rabin Group, the strategy and consulting group in Washington. And he asked us a question on a call: what is the future you want to see for your field? You should think about that very broadly before you start making tactical lists of advocacy and policy work. And so defining and working towards that future is what we're here to do today. As the other programmers and I were sitting around trying to come up for a name for this session, we thought about the very fierce individuals, who are mostly women, who make up these groups. A few ideas for session names were, this was our late night having fun with it. I think we were probably a little loopy at this point, one late night. But we thought these were the kinds of names that seemed to embody these groups to us and that we considered naming the panel. Give that to me, I'll fix it, or give that to us, we'll fix it. Another one was, I said what I said, or don't talk about it, be about it. So without further ado, let's hear from these groups. They'll each present a bit about what they're doing, and then we'll take questions for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to the next group. So the first group that I would like to bring up is the Ethics and Accountability Working Group, which is working to introduce a framework for values-based filmmaking and share examples of how filmmakers might put these values into practice. The vision for this group is ultimately the refinement and adoption of those principles throughout the nonfiction field. And here to share the work on behalf of the rest of their group today are Natalie Bullock-Brown, Bhawin Suchak, and Sonya Childress.
Thanks, Maggie. I love those names. I think we're like the Don't Start None, Won't Be None group. I'm not sure. We need a new name, but I love your suggestions. My name is Sonya Childress, she, her. I'm coming to you all from unceded Ketch, Chumash, and Tongva land in Los Angeles. I'm a senior fellow with the Perspective Fund, which means I'm lucky to have time to devote to field building, writing, research, and important organizing like this. I'm in terms of my physical descriptor, I'm a Black woman with long locks. I'm wearing glasses. I am sitting in a room with a wooden door behind me and some busy furniture and a white wall. So I am part of, as Maggie said, the Ethics and Accountability Working Group. We still need to refine a name, which in addition to my colleagues here, Natalie and Bowen, our other members are Molly Murphy, co-director of Working Films, Sherry Simpson-Dean, senior director of engagement and impact at ITVS, and Pat Ofter-Heidi, senior research fellow at American University's Center for Media and Social Impact. And you'll meet all of them when you join us, hopefully. Come back again on Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific for our full session. So I'm just going to share very briefly some context around the formation of our little ragtag working group. So a few of us came together to debrief the 2020 Sundance Film Festival in early February, where I had just transitioned from working for 14 years at Firelight Media, running impact campaigns and running a fellowship for impact producers, and was transitioning to this new role at the Perspective Fund. And my head was spinning about all of the questions in my mind around what I could do with this time and what the moment that the field was in. And we started to talk about the conflicts that were bubbling up at Sundance over representation, authorship, agency. And as that conversation started, we realized these were conflicts that had been bubbling up at many other festivals and industry events over the 2019 festival year, the 2018 festival year, the 2017 festival year, some of which I was personally involved in and others I had just been hearing about. And I think it was clear to us in those early conversations in early February that the field was grappling with these questions of power and representation in a new way, in a newly direct way, in a newly open way, in a newly confrontational way. And that most folks, from my opinion, whether they are filmmakers or curators or festival program staff or funders, impact producers, distributors, just didn't have the tools to engage in these issues in a substantive way. So they were manifesting viscerally, emotionally at these public events. And while these moments, these eruptions were hugely useful because they forced all of us to reckon with what was beneath the surface, but ultimately to really address what was beneath the surface, we all need tools and resources and real strategies to look at the root causes of this tension. So we started to think of what's available to us, what tools are available. And we looked at Working Films Story Shift resources, which Natalie's going to talk about as being such an important but underutilized resource. And we talked about the need to develop new resources. And could we do this together as a group of folks? So we started to think about what new writing could we do to put this moment into context. But then we thought about the one critical missing piece that many of us agreed on was really important and missing, are resources to help filmmakers in particular navigate these questions and identify and sharpen their own accountability practice. And that if we could help doc filmmakers come into greater alignment around a framework for ethical and accountable filmmaking, then that alone would be a huge contribution to the field. So that's kind of when we focused on a whole suite of resources and tools we might create together, to focusing on this idea about what would a framework for ethical and accountable filmmaking look like. And each of us comes to this work from different places in the field, and we each have different reasons why this work is so necessary and timely and important. So I'm going to pass it to Bowen to share his piece.
Thank you, Sonya, and thank you to Maggie for the introduction and IDA. My name is Bhawin. I am beaming in from Mohican territory, unceded in upstate New York. I am, to describe myself, I'm a South Asian male with short hair, wearing a black t-shirt in a studio with a black background behind me. And yeah, I mean, my sort of, entry point to this particular work, I mean, first off, just having the opportunity to work with this incredible group of people, just having conversations about documentary and about this particular aspect of it is just something that I've really enjoyed. And these conversations have been happening in smaller spaces, as Sonya mentioned, at festivals and in other industry spaces. And I think it's also been happening a lot within the context of my work, which is specifically, I'm a filmmaker working on films, but I'm also an educator, working with an organization called Youth FX, and we run a fellowship called Next Doc, which is about supporting young filmmakers, specifically filmmakers who are filmmakers of color from other marginalized spaces, BIPOC folks who have coming into the field already sort of have a level of skepticism because of the sort of colonial history of documentary and the way that it has been used and weaponized in some ways to sort of exploit particular cultures, and sort of like we have all these different terminologies for it, the white gaze, so on and so forth. So as the industry sort of shifts and we have a lot more people of color in the field working on films and in positions of power, which I think is a testament to the trailblazers that came before us that were kind of calling out some of these issues around accountability and ethics. I thought it was just an incredible time to be able to create some kind of a framework that I think allows us to grapple with these questions in a more direct way, rather than just sort of have them be reactionary. And I think for me, it's like I'm really trying to find ways within my own personal practice and work to not have to react to things that I've done that have caused harm, but to sort of be really thoughtful ahead of time. And I just want to also shout out both Natalie and Sonya, who wrote this incredible article, which if you have not read, it's on the IDA website still, titled The Documentary Future, A Call for Accountability, which I think was sort of like the first kind of sounding out of this particular work. And there's so much in there that I think allowed me, especially even just someone coming into this work, to kind of have this framework to walk into this particular aspect of it, which is a historical context as well. Because one of the things that I really, for me, I'm excited about is that a lot of people who are coming into the field today are thinking about this already, and it's not something that's sort of an afterthought. So I think in a way, this is our work, is to try and help create this framework that's not a fixed sort of, we also went back and forth. It's not a code of ethics. We're not trying to say this is the way to do it. We're trying to say, let's dive into these conversations as filmmakers, as funders, as people who are kind of trusted to really tell people's stories, which is such an intimate thing that we do as documentary filmmakers, that for us to not do that is really, unjust, and I think I've always sort of, come at the work of accountability as something that is intertwined with the work of justice. And it's like, if we're thinking about how we're portraying people's stories, we have to be thinking first and foremost about their particular safety, their particular, sort of like history and where they come from. And also the fact that our films can be a level of permanence in their lives, because these films get put out into the world and you can't go back and re-edit it once it's out, and I think so much of the sort of like pushback has been after films have been made. And I think it's really important for us to think about how we can create something that allows us to ask these questions, to dive into these things, to be honestly interrogating ourselves as makers and each other as makers, and challenging ourselves. And I know, like one of the reactions that I'm sure people will have and maybe are thinking about is like, oh my, I have so many things to think about. But I think like I even go back to some of the things that, our next doc fellows said. We had this amazing panel at Black Star where someone brought up this whole concept of sometimes you don't even make a film if it doesn't feel right. And what does that mean as a filmmaker who's building a career to walk away from an opportunity because you're not the right person to make the film? So, ultimately, I think what we want to present on Thursday, and our workshop is going to be Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific and 12 p.m. Eastern. And I think I really encourage people to come because in addition to our work as a group, we're also going to be able to bring in filmmakers, Ramona Diaz and Jackie Olive, who have thankfully agreed to sort of use some of their work as case studies so we can give examples and not just kind of talk about it in theory or sort of abstract, but really dive into some specifics and ways that they've incorporated these types of questions and frameworks into their own work. So yeah, so I think that's all my piece, and I'd love to pass it over to Natalie.
Hey everyone, my name is Natalie Bullock-Brown. I am a filmmaker and a professor based in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is on land stolen from the Tuscarora and Catawba tribes, indigenous tribes. A physical description of me: I am a Black woman with glasses and short locks, and a couple of movie posters behind me. I want to talk a little bit about how I came to the type of work that we've been doing as a working group. And I think it really begins with my education at Howard University. I went there to pursue a graduate degree in film production. And for those of you who don't know, Howard University is a historically Black college or university. And so there was a way that I was really grounded in Black cinema and African-American cinema. And that was the beginning, I think, of my awareness of the fact that there is a history of a certain type of colonization and even imperialism around filmmaking in general. But it took a while for me to really understand how it exists in the documentary field. And that's primarily because Howard was not really a documentary program. It was a program for people who wanted to go into feature filmmaking in Hollywood or in New York. And, it took a chance in exposure to the work of Marlon Riggs, my first or second year at Howard, that sent me on a path to do documentary filmmaking, and I haven't looked back. So my experiences working in documentary and serving on a few festival selection committees and funding juries, I have kind of rounded out this the beginnings of, I'll say, of me thinking about any sort of work around accountability. And I have to say that it took getting involved with my colleagues at Working Films, Molly Murphy and Hannah Hearn, who are both a part of and run the Story Shift initiative that Working Films has. It took being invited into that work to really begin to have a language for what we mean when we say accountability or ethical storytelling, to really understand the implications of that. And also I teach race and gender. So thinking about how race and gender function in this country has really informed and helped me to understand the nuances of those areas, not only in relation to our country in general, but how it informs what happens in the documentary field. So working with Working Films and Story Shift really gave me a platform and a voice and a role to play in this work that, as many of you know, if not all of you know, has been going on for much longer than these working groups have existed, right? There are people who have been sounding the alarm about what has been slowly but surely developing, or really what's always sort of been in documentary. It's the way it began, right? So we're trying to think about, how do we make it something other than what it's always been? How do we decolonize doc, essentially? And so, you know, this work has really allowed me to meet and get to know and really collaborate with Sonya, Bowen, Molly, and our colleagues who you'll meet on Thursday, Pat After Heidi and Sherry Simpson. So Sonya, Bowen, any other things you want to add?
I would just add, Natalie and Bowen, you all chime in, but you know, we looked at other code of ethics frameworks from other disciplines and from other fields to give us a sense about how other fields, professional fields, organize themselves and the kinds of guardrails that they provide for themselves as folks step into those professions. And there are lots of reasons why the nonfiction field has never embraced or adopted a code of ethics. That's a conversation for another day, which you should talk to Pat After Heidi about, and she'll share a bit about on Thursday. But the fact of the matter is that without any guardrails around a kind of a line in the sand, even though this work is very difficult, ethical questions come up from how you crew, how you shoot, where you shoot, if you should shoot. I mean, how you distribute, where you show your film, how you engage protagonists in that process, what you say to funders, what you don't. These ethical questions come at you at every stage of the filmmaking process, and there are no guardrails, no accepted lines for nonfiction filmmakers to work within, which is why it's no wonder then that when people cross lines that I see very clearly, things come up, and our lines are very different, and we don't have an agreed upon an agreed upon framework that we're all working within, and a framework that is also flexible enough to work across the various kinds of nonfiction films that people are making: personal, experimental, verite, investigative. But we do think it's possible to create a basic framework that everyone can agree upon, and then think about how you put those key values or ethics into practice, depending on the kind of film you're making. So we're not trying to create a punitive, rigid code. We're trying to create a framework that we hope filmmakers and eventually the rest of the industry can embrace and adopt. And the process of creating that code with community is as important as the final product of that framework. And so we really want this to be something that all of you can participate in and see yourselves in and embrace.
Yeah, and I mean, the last thing I would just like to add is, I mean, I think it's important to also acknowledge that there's a lot of filmmakers who are inherently working in this particular way and who are thinking about these questions really deeply and who are exemplifying the idea of working, in this space, thinking about accountability and thinking about ethics and really taking care of the folks that they're working with and whose stories they're telling, and being respectful of the communities that they're coming into. And I think that's in a way, like, those are folks that we want to hear some of the ways that you're doing that, and we want to talk about, and kind of uplift and amplify those types of films. And I think even one of the things I remember from your article, Sonya and Natalie, was this idea of, like, how do we sort of shift the industry to really, and not even just industry, even just like audiences and everybody to in a way, like, recognize that and give, attention to those kinds of films, because often those are films that are really also have in a way, a lot more of a powerful impact on people, because I believe that it comes through in the filmmaking. I think when there is an equitable relationship, when there's accountability and there's transparency, the film itself can kind of like embody that and have that, sort of come through in the image and the storytelling. And so I really want to just, first of all, just shout you two out, because I think you guys have been doing this work for many years, and I'm just happy to be a part of that. And I'm really, really excited, because this is not going to end even on Thursday. This is an ongoing process that we want to continue for months, to really, like, zone in on things that we feel are co-created by folks who are making films as well.
Thank you all. We're going to take a couple questions here. And for those of you who've been asking, the session that they're referring to, the workshop that this group is going to lead, is on Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can find it on the schedule. A question here was, what does guardrail really mean to you? Someone asked Sonya, in reading your previous work, I often wonder if by guardrails you mean policies.
Yeah, that's a good question. And isn't this session on Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific?
I'm sorry, it is.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries. I misspoke earlier as well. The guardrail is an imperfect word, and probably not a word that I would, not a hill I want to, die on. I think the word I would prefer to, and I probably should use more, as framework. I think what we're trying to create is a framework. There's no, what we don't want to do is, we want to tap into and help filmmakers get really clear about the values that guide their work and their accountability practice. And we are all guided by values, but sometimes those values come up against real pressures that the industry puts on us. And when those pressures come, we either hold tight to those values or we let those values go. And I think what we're talking about is there are some key values that, if we can all agree that should guide all of our work, and we all stand firm on those, then the industry will respond to that. And the industry can begin to not try to push filmmakers to relinquish those key core values. And so guardrail, in some ways, guardrail is like a metaphor for where you say, I'm not, transparency is really critical here for me. And I cannot misrepresent my work with the protagonist, even if that might get more salacious storytelling or whatever it is. It's an example. So guardrail is not the perfect word. I think a kind of framework of articulated values that we can all agree upon is probably better language.
Great, thank you. And I know that we will all look forward to that session on Thursday to dive into this. Plenty to discuss here. Thank you all so much for your work that you've done so far, and that I know that you have some great plans for the year ahead, and that for starting that public process with us here at Getting Real. We really appreciate. Okay, our next working group, Beyond Inclusion, Equity and Accountability in Docs. This group is taking a holistic approach to systems change within documentary, from the education pipeline all the way up to the streaming giants, developing actionable guidelines for necessary changes at each level of the ecosystem in order to chart a BIPOC-led course towards true racial equity and accountability in a field that prides itself on these expressed values. And presenting on behalf of their group today, and we'll be sharing the complete list of everyone in their group, is Gita Gundbeer, Jihan Robinson, and Marjon Saffinia. So thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us. I think I am to start, and my name is Gita Gundbeer, and my pronouns are she and hers, and I am in Brooklyn on the land of the Lenape people, and I am a South Asian woman sitting in what is my living room, and I'm wearing pink glasses and a striped dress. So again, we're so honored to be here, and I think for our conversation, I'm to start with sort of how we began, how this group came together, and I think also my perspective as a filmmaker, just to build on some of what was said by the previous group. I am a filmmaker who has been working in the industry for quite a while, has been well rewarded and for my work, and have had experience in multiple rooms that I have been in. And I think that the beginning of of this group and how we came together really comes from the sort of we have all among us been working separately in different organizations, building power and trying to work towards equity and equality for BIPOC people within this industry. But I think in the recent months, as we've seen the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests in the streets, and also we've had an administration in power that is absolutely hostile to our existence. And the urgency around the issues have grown. We have, I think, it's been for all of us, we have been having these conversations amongst ourselves for an incredibly long period of time. But what was really was sort of interesting and in some ways painful, I think, if I can speak for all of us, is to see our colleagues in the community who, again, we are in a community that that professes to be quite woke, that wants to do the right thing, that, as Sonya Childress mentioned in her article on this issue, that seeks to give a voice to the voiceless, which is not, again, that's a statement that we need to deconstruct. Because we're, again, rendering people voiceless is, or labeling them as voiceless is obviously problematic. But we have watched our would-be allies, again, sort of moving forward in ways that have been comfortable to them, sort of functioning in a system that ultimately does not benefit all of us equally. So for myself, I think there was specifically an incident in which involved social media, in which a film about Tiger Woods, which was being directed by two white filmmakers, it was, again, the filmmakers put made the announcement about the film. And for myself, I think it was a triggering moment, because just seeing, again, on the same timelines, they were, of course, incredibly supportive of the movement that was happening around them as far as Black Lives Matter, but yet it appeared that no thought had gone into the representation and authorship of the film, and the directing process. So I made a comment on Facebook, which led to a large number of people, particularly women of color, many from the organization Brown Girls Doc Mafia, also commenting on the post and sort of asking the question about asking directly why, which is something we don't often do of our colleagues, of our white colleagues in particular. We don't often have these conversations openly. And our group came together around that moment, which was just, again, I think, for a bit of a catalyst for us, and we are looking to now chart a path forward. And again, with principles in place, with sort of ethics in place that can lead to essentially an industry that we all get to participate in. And so I think with that, I can pass it to Marjon, who is one of the people who got pulled into this group.
Got pulled into your clutches. My name is Marjon Saffinia. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming to you from West Los Angeles, which is Chumash land. I've got brown curly hair, and I'm wearing a colorful top, and I'm in a colorful room because Lord knows we all need some brightness in our lives. So our working group is about 15 people. Somebody helpful is going to drop all those names in the chat so you can see them. We're a mix of filmmakers, executives, nonprofit organizations, and community partner leaders. As Gita mentioned, we came together as a result of Tigergate, but our work is much more profound than that one incident. We recognize that we just can't live up to this profess solidarity of racial equity without making profound changes at every level of the documentary ecosystem. So, and that this work, this design for this work needs to be led by BIPOC people. Or as Maria Agee Carter said this morning, much more succinctly, what are the changes that we need to make to get to media reparations, which is a phrase I'm totally stealing from Maria moving forward. So, the folks before us said this has been going on for a long time, these conversations in brown spaces, but for many, this is a newish conversation, which just sort of underlines the tremendous divide that exists in our industry. And I really want to give props to IDA for making this a centerpiece of this Getting Real and not like a sidebar conversation. So thank you to our family at IDA. So what we're saying is that we can't be satisfied anymore with the diversity initiatives or token hires, and a system in which, sort of name filmmakers of color can be counted on one hand and executives and gatekeepers of color can be counted on the other hand is no longer a system that is acceptable or that works for us. So how do we go about dismantling this system? We're in a golden age of documentaries. The other day, I said this on a Beyond Resilience call, and Marcia Smith from Firelight corrected me, and she said we're actually in a corporate age of documentaries. And so I think we want to acknowledge that we can't fix these problems solely in the independent sector, right? It has to flow from the very top all the way down to sort of the educational level. And there's no pathway to real equity without that change being systemic. I think that we believe that the time has come for our white colleagues and our white adjacent colleagues to take some responsibility for the systems and structures that they've built, which are overwhelmingly white, and to acknowledge that while there is more money flowing than ever in the documentary industry, most of that money is hoarded in the hands of white-led and white-run organizations, production companies, platforms, and that's no longer acceptable either. I want to acknowledge a couple of quick things. The Ford Foundation have just published a fantastic report by Sahar Driver, also called Beyond Inclusion. We're not that work, but we're happy that everybody's on the same tip. We're talking a lot about BIPOC folk, but we recognize that our brothers and sisters in the disability community and in the LGBTQ community also work in spaces that don't represent them. So when we use that as shorthand, but this change belongs to everyone. And we're really early in our process, and we're just starting to sort of develop some guidelines, which are intended as beginnings of conversations. And I think Jahan's going to talk a little bit more about that. So real quick, we're looking at the industry and the commercial sector, the production company and the individual filmmaker sector, the institutional and philanthropic sector, the audience sector, and the educational sector, the early pipeline into our industry. I have a whole list of things that we're working on, but we don't have time, and I don't want to cut off everyone who's going to come after me. So I will shortcut that and just say that at its heart, we believe that in every one of these sectors, your staff room and your boardroom and your C-suite and your leadership need to look like America. And America doesn't look like what it used to, right? So we're on the precipice in this country of being a majority people of color population. And that needs to be reflected in all of these spaces and all of these positions of power, because all that flows downhill. I'm going to stop there because I have way more to say, but we don't have time. I'm going to let Jahan pick up and talk a bit more about the actions that we are starting to take just now.
Thank you, Marjon. Hello, my name is Jahan Robinson. My pronouns are she, her. I am in Los Angeles on Chumash land as well. I am in a white room, not as colorful as Marjon's, wearing a black shirt and a bun on my head. I am black, a black woman, and proud of it. And so, thank you, Marjon. Thank you, Gita, for that context. I think, when this group came together, we sort of realized we were having parallel experiences in the rooms and spaces that we were in, whether we were working in the nonprofit sector, the educational sector, as filmmakers. And for me personally, I have spent time sort of in all of those places as a producer, a maker, a buyer, a seller, but primarily in the platform and network arena. And as we realized we had these parallel experiences, we realized that yes, this work needs to be led by us, but this work cannot be ours alone, which also, tends to happen when we have these conversations about diversity and inclusion and, how we can actually make real systems change. So our approach is really led by, inviting people into the room with us and to start having these collective and collaborative conversations where it's not just our responsibility to care and manage and affect change, but everyone's. It's better for the industry, it's better for the work, it's better for the audiences that we want to serve, and everyone has to participate. So our work is really starting with having these conversations. We've identified our own, areas of improvement that we, think the industry needs to make, but we want to hear from people across these sectors and, our white counterparts. And also not only hear from them about where they feel the solutions may lie, but also to provide context. I think it's really important to note that we're in a moment of context. And I think, the social media event, Tigergate, if you will, that, sort of Gita, lit the match on was conversations that were happening behind the scenes, but to a lot of our white colleagues was extremely surprising. And that can't exist anymore. Nobody's allowed to, pretend, or not even pretend, I shouldn't even go that place, but you need to have the context. It's everyone's responsibility to have the context. And so that's a part of these conversations as well. For those who are unaware of what has been, our experiences in these spaces, to illuminate what they have been, to make them feel like an active part of this work as well by understanding the experiences of others. So we're getting started in, just a couple of weeks. And, we're, as, Gita and Marjon have both mentioned, we're at the early stages of our work. And we really hope to, through our work, really try to find out in all of these sectors how we can start taking the steps to make change for a more inclusive, diverse and representative industry.
And one thing I just want to add that we did not cover is that part of what we're trying to deconstruct here too is the very nature of documentary filmmaking, which is absolutely a colonial exercise and stems from the colonial exercise of filmmakers, usually of European descent, traveling into and sort of infiltrating communities that are not their own, and again telling the stories through a specific lens, which ends up being an exclusive lens. And I think the ask of representation behind the camera and access, again, and accountability goes far beyond just, sort of as people think maybe racial politics or the idea of sharing. It's for us, this is, it's critical to our survival. I mean, again, and I think this is something else that Sonya, Sonya Childress had said, is that documentary filmmaking and media really is a tool. It's one of the few tools that we have to be able to shed light on our communities. It's one of the ways to disseminate information that we have, and one of the most powerful. And the idea that BIPOC people would be it would essentially be blocked from the access to both funding and authorship that is needed, and the empowerment that is needed, ultimately is dangerous for us. It's for the issues that we're facing currently, with this administration and just in general. I mean, in this country through history, this is, if you look at white supremacy and anti-Blackness, that is the foundation of this country. So this is an issue that obviously, again, it's a microcosm of a national issue, and each industry has to look at it in turn.
I think Maggie, you're coming back in.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yes, I'm coming back in.
Sorry for the awkward pause. We were just waiting for you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you all for that. And let's just go to a couple questions. One person asked, I wonder who is leading and partaking in these conversations among Caucasian filmmakers. And if I could just add to that, among Caucasian gatekeepers, because I know that that's a lot of who you will be in dialogue with as you begin these conversations.
Yeah, so we're kicking off in a couple of weeks our first kind of roundtable. We're making them private for now because out of respect for people to have space to sort of speak honestly. So we're having a roundtable with, to shorthand, what we would call some of the big guns in the production company space. Jahan has reached out peer-to-peer, and I think that's really important. So we're starting those conversations. In the filmmaker space, I think there are groups. D-Word is starting a program for white filmmakers to talk about whiteness in documentary. And there are, other groups, informal groups that have formed. But as Jahan said, we can't have this conversation. We've been having this conversation on our own for many years, and nothing much has changed. So it doesn't work unless our white counterparts agree that they have a role in it, a critical role, and want to lean in.
Thank you. You've spoken about the corporate age of documentaries, and I was struck today by an article about Netflix having a price hike coming soon, and how wonderful it's going to be for their shareholders. What a boon it's going to be. And so I think that when amongst indie filmmakers, we can talk about values. We have partners in this space, our distribution partners, who have this value of profit. It's just, you can't hide it. They have shareholders who want to make money off of their shares. So I, want to ask you about, how do you have those conversations with folks who might have their heart in the right place, might want to do the right thing, but they ultimately have a different kind of responsibility. They have different stakeholders. They have shareholders, and this is kind of like inherent in the capitalist society, telling stories in the capitalist society. So I'm just curious if you could address that.
I think, as Gita mentioned, this is a conversation we're having within our industry of documentary film, but this is something that's happening in the United States, globally. It's happening within the walls of these corporations as well. These conversations about representation, accountability. So I would hope that in the corporate efforts to really address the same things that we are addressing, that redefining, re-examining how they view audiences, their perceptions of commerciality, can shift to a world that we see when we open our eyes and look outside. And so, I don't know if it's something that we personally can address. It's what we will try to do, but I know, sort of anecdotally, that a lot of corporations are, asking themselves these questions of their business and what it means to be good, what it means in terms of good business. And I think what they need to understand, that it is good business,
Mm-hmm.
And it is commercial business. And so, hopefully we can help illuminate why it is.
I'll just add on to that real quick. I think brown people like profits too. I'm just, why should all the money be in one set of hands? It just doesn't make sense. And I think Maria spoke so movingly this morning, with some numbers around, for example, in her case, Latinx audiences. It's not true that audiences don't want to see this stuff, right? So your subscribers are going to go up if you show us content that looks like us and reflects our stories. We see films like Black Panther that just blew the lid off in terms of box office. So the audiences are hungry, and it's the gatekeepers who are the obstruction. Right. And perhaps that obstruction is not intentional, but I guarantee you, if we have 25, 50 more Jahans in those levels of decision making, the content will change and the audiences will come for it. So I think that it's a false equivalency to put these two things in juxtaposition. There's enough profit for all of us, and there's enough media landscape for all of us to be seen.
I just want to add to that too. I just want to point out like Smriti Mundra, who had a series on Netflix about, arranged marriages in India and about a matchmaker. And that was, became an enormous hit here in the US. It was went globally viral. So I think there is absolutely, it's about recognizing your audience again. The idea of with white supremacy being sort of if we all kind of accept that is the foundation of this society that it was built on. When you look at it, the landscape of what distributors think is what what they should put out there, that's from a white lens as well. And it is obviously it's changing, but the numbers will reflect the demand if again we can just move past that.
Thank you. The next question is, can there be a place of public access documentary that is subsidized?
I mean, we've got this wonderful institution called public media, which we all love, and many of us would not have careers if it weren't for public media. If the question is, can public media do a better job living up to its expressed mandate? I think the answer to that is yes as well, right? And one of our working group members, Grace Lee, is on a one-woman mission. I think there's an article coming out mid-October through the Ford Foundation, A Provocation. But when we look at the landscape for nonfiction funded by public media, a small piece of it goes to these great independents, right, who have tons of people of color. And then very large pieces of it go to single individuals in many cases in the landscape of documentary. So yeah, there is a place for that. But perhaps the changes that we're talking about need to come, they're across the board. We're literally talking about changing the DNA of how we do things and what is normal. And when we are successful in making that change, results will change accordingly. Maggie, I don't know if one of you dropped it into the chat, but just in case someone wants to holler at us or tell us about the awful thing that happened to them or join us in some way, we've set up a group, which is an email, which is BI Working Group. Not because we're all bisexual, but because that stands for Beyond Inclusion. So it's biworkinggroup@gmail.com, and you can reach us there.
Thank you. Yeah, it was in the chat, and we will post it again.
Thank you.
And yeah, and then, the one final question before we move over to distribution advocates, and I believe this is a question that they will be addressing as well, which is there such a thing as a media commons, and what are the types of accountability that happen when with an enclosure of the media commons? I'm not sure. I may have spoken that wrong, but I guess if you could just address the concept of a media commons.
Someone smarter than me totally has to take that question.
I'm sorry. I don't understand what a media commons is. I have never heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it will be something. I think that there's questions of ownership that I know Distribution Advocates is going to be discussing. So thank you all so much for your work, and we look forward to hearing about it as it moves forward.
Thank you for making space.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next group, Distribution Advocates, whom I first learned about. They published a manifesto in January or February, which was brilliant. And we can paste that in the chat. And Distribution Advocates works to collectively reclaim power for independent storytelling creators in the current systems of distribution and exhibition. We are in a coalition in formation, striving to advocate for filmmakers and maintain plurality and originality in a culture that needs it more than ever. We fight for radical transparency, rebalancing, and entrenched inequities and blazing a new, more interesting, accessible, and inclusive way forward. And presenting on behalf of the group today, which is a larger group than who we're seeing, is Carlos Gutierrez, Amy Hobby, and Sarah Kim. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie, and thanks to the IDA for the space and the platform. I'm going to go first, representing this group that we've been meeting and talking about issues around distribution. And our group is composed by producer and distributor Karen Chin, producer and director Avril Speaks, programmer and writer A.B. Sun, producer Sarah Kim, who's here, producer Amy Hobbs, and myself. And just going to talk about very specific issues, just to give a little bit of a framework for the document that we prepare. We're very pragmatic, so we decided to come up with a very specific outcome. But just to give a little bit of a framework, we had a very engrossing and enriching conversations and about very specific topics. So one of them is the need to put the filmmakers and the audience at the center of the equation in the film world, particularly in distribution. We create a very sophisticated system that puts the filmmakers and the audience at the end. So we need to put them back at the center and work around it. Also, the second one, that's the previous groups have talked a lot about the need for more transparency and accountability in our field, particularly into film distribution. There's a lot of pressure, particularly to filmmakers when they're applying for funds. They have to be accountable of every cent that they receive, but it's not the same way the other way around with film programmers, with film distributors, and so we need to create a more transparent world. Also, we discussed the need to create different types of distribution and commercialization models, in the sense that sort of in opposition to a one-size-fits-all type of approach. One of the problems that we see is that basically all of the films, regardless of their budget, regardless of the intent, are basically distributed or have to go through the same model of distribution. So we need to create a more flexible, depending on the different depending on the different models. So we thought that the word distribution itself has been overused, losing their meaning. So we also need to redefine and be more specific in terms of priorities and goals. I think issues or concepts rather as accessibility, monetizing, exposure can be more useful in terms of talking about distribution. Because these days, film can have distribution, but nobody will see it. The filmmaker will go and won't make any money back, and probably the filmmaker won't make a film again. So we, again, distribution is an overused word. It's useful to be very more specific. A fifth point is the need to democratize the validation process in cinema. As filmmaking became more accessible in the past few years, the gatekeeping process went the opposite way. And actually it became tighter. So we need to find better validation tools for the films within the film world and also outside. And then more specifically, many of us in the group, we do a lot of pro bono mentorship and advising to filmmakers. And we've noticed a gap between all the resources available to filmmakers out there via film festivals, via seminars, this type of conference, but a general lack of basic information with filmmakers. We saw that there's a gap. Somehow the information is not trickling down, is not filtering to the people who should know at least the very basics. So we decided to come up with a document that could serve like a very basic guide to guide filmmakers in this process. And Sarah's going to talk more about this specific document.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Kim. I'm also streaming in from Los Angeles, land of Chumash. And we're very excited with the distribution advocates led by Amy Hobby and Karen Chen, alongside Avril Speaks and Abby's son, that we get to share this cheat sheet with you. And it's really a document for filmmakers as a tool to better advocate for themselves when dealing with distributors. And the intention, as Carlos mentioned, is really to challenge like industry norms, asking for terms that make better conditions for the filmmakers, and protecting ourselves in negotiations with our films. So this document is going to be available to share with everybody. But I will just touch upon like a couple of these overall considerations just to have you, hear and consider. So the first one, the objectives. It's always a good idea to align expectations with your team. This is especially going into a sales or negotiation situation or deciding to work with a certain distributor. So prioritizing your objectives, and this, filmmakers always say that like all of these things apply, but it doesn't mean that these are not like each of these are not important, but it's really important to at least prioritize which one would be the kind of main goal to really, that is the priority. That can kind of help inform big and small decisions throughout the process. So one is it reaching as wide an audience as possible? So it's, eyeballs. Two is it maximum revenue generation? So it's money, whether it's like to recoup or to, pay back investors, like, is it just making as much profit? The third one is it increasing the brand of the filmmaker and the team? So, sometimes there's more value in raising the profile of the filmmaking team so that it supports the careers and helps to get the next project funded. And the fourth one is it raising awareness and potential policy change? So is it creating impact? And it might, so all of these four objectives, it might look different for each film, but it's really important to have this priority set and to be on the same page with the objective. And then just the second thing I'll share is just the second point on that document, which is know your speaking position. So it's really hard to get a good distribution offer with so many films in the market for independent films. So it can really feel like obtaining distribution is like a feat in itself, considering the small percentage of films that get through the top film festivals, attach sales, get critical recognition, and finally to distribution. So it can feel like the distributor has all the power to make an offer or take it away. However, if a distributor is interested in your film, you really have to remember that you have the power as the creator and filmmaker, and that they want your film. So don't be afraid to ask questions and negotiate for terms that suit your needs. Don't be afraid to walk away from the deal, even if there are no other offers. And in the long run, you may be better off retaining those rights than being stuck with a distributor you're unhappy with. So this is something I really had to remind myself while working with a distributor on a previous film, because we pushed back with a lot of changes to the original contract that was offered to us. And of course, the distributor didn't like it. And he said that in over 10 years, he's never had anyone ask for so many things or just, challenge certain things about the contract. But just because it's been that way, it's not a reason to not negotiate those things or change those things. So, and there were, and we really knew our distributor's strengths and our strengths, and that we knew that we could reach our specific communities and certain territories better than he did. So it was a really difficult process getting through that contract phase, but we're really glad that we did, because it ended up paying off, and the rights that we kept and self-distributed, we ended up generating more revenue directly, whereas we still have not recouped from the proceeds from the distributor. So, that's just one example, but self-distribution and service deals are a pathway that many more filmmakers are choosing to do, but it really does require a lot of time and resources and money. So knowing if your teams can actually do that work, or if it can fit that need, is a really important discussion to have. And then, it continues to break down a few things with distributors, sales agents, and aggregators, and that I won't go into, but yeah, Amy, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Hobby. I'm a producer for many, many years, calling in from New York, Lenape land. And many of you know I'm very passionate about talking about distribution and distribution structures. One thing that we talked a lot about in our group is why there seem to be a lot of panels and online resources around distribution, but still the information never seems really clear or to get to the right places. So one of the things we talked about is how can we simplify the thinking and make it more, well, for me, fun and easy to think about. So can you put up my slide, please? 3 dimensions of distribution in 3 minutes. This is also outlined in our document that'll be circulated. Go to the next slide, please. So we came up with this organizing principle to analyze opportunities, 3 dimensions, including the length of the term, media types and territories. So length, space, time, space, and media types. In terms of the length of term, a lot of the things we talked about is, how you can negotiate the length of the term. This is something that I've done a lot. People come in the olden days, people would ask for 25-year terms. There were automatic renewals and very long exclusivity timeframes. Territories can be defined in a number of different ways, by a single country, by a group of countries, language. So for example, group of countries might be North America, Latin America, and so on. One example that I remember, again, just like sort of thinking through when you're going through the process of a distribution deal and thinking about how your film can reach audiences is I was selling a film in Toronto at the film festival, and our sales agent, we had a very great offer on the table, but we were $100,000 short of being able to pay off the investors from the advance. Again, a very privileged position to be in, but I thought it was a deal for North America, and I just really wanted to come out of Toronto and pay back my investors. I thought that would be a real triumph. But it was like, no, we hit a wall with that number. So I had our sales agent go back. I finally said, well, can I just get Canada back? So our sales agent went back and said, can they have Canada? And they said, okay. So, and then I sold Canada separately to a distributor that I knew for $60,000. So while I didn't quite get that $100,000, I got a lot closer to it. And I still felt at least I had the wherewithal to think about, the 3 dimensions, and how I could figure something out, because they weren't budging on anything else. And then the last dimension is media types, which, we all seem to know, but there's always confusion when we're talking to filmmakers, theatrical, non-theatrical, educational, television. There's all the VODs, the SVOD, TVOD, AVOD. There's new VODs all the time. I call it vaudeville. There's just VODs galore. MVOD is a new one we heard about when we were talking things through. Membership VOD, which is PBS. And then lastly, derivative rights, which is something that we spend a little bit of time talking about. Derivative rights being, spin-offs, prequels, sequels, stories based on the character in your film. It's our opinion, derivative rights should remain with the filmmaker, that there should be a one license deal, unless, of course, you're being offered quite a lot of money to include that. I guess in, so we like to, you can go to the last slide now. Okay, so this is what we call Amy Hobby's Keynote Corner. I make these keynotes myself. So one thing is, when you think of this all rights deal, or when I was starting out, I would go into a distribution deal and think I'm giving my film, which is this one block, over to a distributor, when in fact it's really much more complex. And there's a time and a place for an all rights deal, particularly if you are going to recoup and get a good amount of money. Those deals are far and few between. And if you're not, as Sarah expressed in her example, maybe there are things you want to hold on to, and to think about what you might want to hold on to. You can again use the rule of the 3 dimensions. So I sort of broke it up there in a little bit of a clunky way, but you can see Latin America, North America. So the depth is geography, what that license would be, which is sort of windowing. So 3 years, 18 months. Like if you license something for 18 months, you can license it again to that platform, or a different platform afterwards. And then all the media types going up in the height column. And just again, understanding like this as a little trick for when you're thinking about how to best distribute your film. One thing I'll say about media is I have another example similar to Sarah's, where we fought hard to get retain the educational rights to a documentary, and we were not successful. They assured us they were going to distribute it, and hard lesson learned. After 2 years, it was, and many requests that came directly to us, we were unable to distribute it in universities, to show it in classes, to recoup what could have been a very lucrative path for that particular film. We went back after 2 years and pointed this out and asked for a non-exclusive opportunity to do it, not to take it away from them, but to do it non-exclusively and recoup that on our own. And we were able to do that, actually. So, sometimes, when it's over, it's maybe not totally over. It's like my motto is just keep asking, keep asking, keep asking. Can I have this? What about this? What about that? And just use this framework as a way to think about what the best path might be for your film. And then one other thing is, each film is pretty unique, and the distribution landscape can be kind of daunting and complex. So one thing we talked about doing that's been very an interesting idea for us is to come up with this idea of distribution advocates, which is in our name, to raise a fund or some money so that we can pay folks who have been through this process quite a bit to work with filmmakers one-on-one, so the cost is not their burden, to advocate for them in the same way that you might hire a medical advocate or patient advocate to help families who are navigating complex medical systems. This is a pretty common role in the healthcare system, and we thought that having something like this, distribution advocates, would be super beneficial, because there's a lot of intermediaries. You might have a sales agent, a publicist, all this, but they don't lawyer. They don't always have the time or ability to break it down and advocate for what's best for the film. So, yeah, I guess that's what we got.
Great, thank you all. Lots of props in the chat for the visual aids there. I know that it's helpful for many of us. So the first question is one that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds, which is that regarding distribution in the age of COVID, this person is asking, I've heard many a story from filmmakers being advised by agents not to screen in an online festival, or an agency signing on films and filmmakers, and because of layoffs, they're not shopping their films around and giving them the love and attention that the filmmaker expected.
I mean, if I can jump in, there's I don't think there's a formula. What is important to mention, though, is that, of course, this crisis has affected a lot of people, basically everybody, and more specifically the intermediaries and the sales agents as intermediaries. In that sense, just be sure that your priorities and your goals are in tune with the sales agent's goals, because that's the problem. The film sales agents, for a large part, they're protecting their own interest, and in many cases, they are not the same ones as the filmmakers. So, I think that's very key. One, in terms of selecting a sales agent, trust. For me, trust is a key word in all of this. Even if you offer $1 million, if there's no trust, be careful. So, be careful how you shop for a film sales agent, but also, question the sales agent. And more so now, right now, there's a lot of opportunities to experiment because, so again, put your priorities and act on it.
Great. The next question is, can you talk about funders who give small amounts, 10 to 20,000, and get first looks for broadcast rights on those projects that still have, anywhere, 400,000, for example, for completion. And this person notes, particularly for emerging BIPOC filmmakers for whom that seed money is first money in and makes or breaks the project. But to give first look is quite a lot to give up for that amount of money.
Maybe, the point I am in my career, I haven't experienced this. It seems a little crazy to me. It seems like, there should be some standard there, like a minimum percentage of the budget. It seems like I don't know. Sarah, have you experienced anything like that?
I have not. It also sounds really crazy to me too. Yeah.
Don't do it. I guess our answers don't do it. But I guess if you don't have a choice, then.
I think that I've heard this from many filmmakers. The value of that first money in is so huge, and that the sense of gratitude that I've heard some filmmakers say, or a sense of obligation that they might feel to whoever that first funder was. And I think just by you saying don't do it is probably incredibly helpful for many people who might have been in a situation like that.
Because these decisions that you make, affect the film down the line for the distribution, and it could just be entirely the wrong choice for your film way down the line. I just I know there's not a lot of choices for that first money in, and with the pausing of Tribeca Film Institute, for example, there's maybe less places to go to look for that funding that doesn't have those obligations. So I would do everything to try to negotiate that away. If they really believe in your film, if they really care about you as a filmmaker, and you call it out, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. The next question, and I think this will have to be our last one, is can you talk about licensing in the digital age? One obstacle I've come across is that when you are licensing primarily to a digital distributor, it is really hard to keep enough rights to license to a broadcaster if this opportunity arises second.
Carlos?
It's once again kind of this question of the order of operations and where is your leverage in this situation?
Amy, Sarah, you have more experience in digital and broadcast than me, I guess.
Yeah, it is a dilemma. It's really just sort of, going at it, but it's like that timing issue. It's like, we the problem is a lot of the broadcasters have take the digital rights, right? Or want the digital rights, and you have to kind of weigh and go back and forth and go between them. Yeah, it's again, like if you think about it in the sort of, again, map something out in 3 dimensions. Something else I've done is create a map for a film about how if you blow up all the rights and split it and talk about windowing platforms and create a model for what it can really help you look at what you want to, even before you finish shooting, it can help you look at what that ideal world might be like. And maybe this is something, again, that distribution advocates can work towards, is helping you creating that model for your film that shows you the possibilities, and you can have that conversation with someone who's looking for rights that you're feeling a little bit reluctant about giving up down the line.
Great.
Just going back to what we presented again, the priorities are important. So what's the most important? That more people see the film, that you can make more money back. So I think it's a combination, the combination of the timing of the different platforms, but also your own priorities, and based on those two different things, make the decision.
Thank you all so much. And, I did want to just take this opportunity to highlight something about the platform. On Friday and Saturday, there will be an opportunity for folks to create their own breakout sessions. So if there are conversations like this one, which was overflowing with ideas and comments in the chat, and that folks want to initiate a breakout session on Friday or Saturday, you can do that. And then you can just notify everyone about it in the conference chat, invite folks to come in so that we can continue these kind of conversations. And that option will be available on Friday and Saturday. So I want to thank all of the panelists for all three of the working groups for giving us a window into what you're working on. I know you're all sort of deep in the midst of processes, and it's really generous of you to let us have a look. Thanks to Hope Simon and Mara Bassani Santamaria for ASL interpretation, and Recapped for live captioning. And we have one more main stage session tonight that's going to be excellent, that I hope you will join us for, and that is expanding expression. And thanks so much.